Alrighty. Well, thank you, Grant, for hosting this session. It's going to be a fantastic one. I've heard many fantastic things about your session, so I'm very much looking forward to it. I reached out to Grant to talk a little bit about lean startup and different strategies and approaches one can take to doing something that's quite difficult. And reading up, I sort of brushed up on the lean startup methodology, and launching an uncertainty was sort of this thing that kept coming up. And it's very difficult for startups to know what the next step is when they're normally doing something that hasn't happened before or hasn't been done before. So while it is, I'm sure everyone's heard of lean startup and the lean startup method, and Eric Reich. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I think it's Reich, but his book's amazing, but to actually implement the strategies is a different ballgame altogether. So thank you, Grant, for running this session, and I'm sure everyone will get a lot out of it.
Very welcome, and thanks for the intro, Sasha. Certainly, lean startup and Eric's book is one of the earlier books around sort of method for startups. And one of the things that's interesting to me, I've been helping founders and the startup community generally for a bit more than 10 years now. Sort of late 2010, early 2011 is when I really started to do startup things in Melbourne and Australia. I've run events in Melbourne and Sydney and even internationally, and I've run programs in Australia that are part of global networks. And so I first met Troy, in fact, through one of the programs I ran for founders, a development program for founders. And so Troy came through that program, I think, over the summer of 2016-17. And so for me, it's interesting that often when people first come to something like startup, they imagine that it's only a recent, only a new thing. They're joining something when everybody else is joining it, and it's all new. But really, I've spoken to founders of software businesses who were Australian-based in the late 70s, and who took their businesses to essentially to Silicon Valley. It wasn't really called Silicon Valley yet in the 70s, but took their startups over to the Bay Area. And so the idea of these new businesses trying to launch into conditions of extreme uncertainty is not by any means new, but it really started to get better defined, I guess. Well, Steve Blank was one of the key people who really started to define it better, and Eric was a student of Steve's, and so the lean startup was actually conceived and written after Eric had been through some of Steve's programs at uni. And so the lean startup is definitely a really interesting sort of perspective on trying to bring a little bit of discipline almost to this crazy thing called startup. And so as an engineer, I qualified as an engineer at MECH a long time ago now, but one of the things that I really like is some structure and some methods. If there are tools and methods for doing things, it makes it a lot easier. Even if what you're trying to achieve is completely uncertain, a little bit of process and a little bit of method just helps you to be more confident, to make some plans, to run some experiments, have some hypotheses, and when things either do or don't go as you thought or planned, to be able to collect data and learn. And so, that's one of the things that I wanted to share with all of you. Before I do jump into it, I'd really love to hear just a couple of comments from each of you who are on so far. I can see Daniel, Anishan, and Divya. I'd love to get a bit of an idea of between idea and repeatable sales, if that was 0 and an 8, say, I'd love to get your ranking of where you're at on that scale from just an idea to repeatable scales at 8. Give your business or your business idea a bit of a rating on that scale and share it with me so I've got a bit of an idea of where you're at currently. either in the chat or by taking yourselves off mute and sort of calling out your number.
Hi, Divya here. For me, I'd say 2 or 3.
Yep, super. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're at 2 as well. Yes.
Yeah, I love it. So as soon as somebody said 2 is an acceptable number. So I love that. A little bit of clustering around 2. There's no confirmatory bias happening here at all, that's for sure. Daniel?
Yeah, so me and Ish and I, like, we currently, so I guess we're, partners, I'd say. So yeah, we're pretty much at just like the idea stage at this moment.
So you're saying 1?
Yeah, around 1 or 2. Like
Yeah.
somewhere, I'd say in between.
Super, no stress. And I love it when founders who are working on the same project score at different ends of the scale. And you guys did not do that. That's really disappointing. One of you should have said 2 and one of you should have said 7. And we could have gone, are you guys on the same team? But anyway, that's a whole separate conversation. So relatively early on, which is cool, which means that a lot of what we go through, while it won't necessarily be new, will hopefully help you to sort of make a few new plans, maybe get a few new insights. So let's see how we go. I will just... It disappears from my screen, so I'm not... So you're going to run through a few definitions. So like I've already declared, Steve Blank, Eric and some of the others, the Osterwalder and Pena are the strategizer team. Like, I love a good model. And so we'll talk about things that the 3 of you have no doubt seen before, but hopefully I can give you a few different perspectives and maybe a couple of extra insights. So this is typically, especially when you talk to a technical founder and you sort of try to get their opinion of how this is all going to play out, especially when they're down there at, just with a really good idea. If they don't, so one of 2 ways, either as an inventor, they're either paranoid about sharing their idea because it's such a good idea. And, if they share it, somebody will steal it and implement their amazing business before them. So either the paranoids who want to keep their idea locked up in a garage, or the people who are just really passionate and in love with their with the solution that they're starting to formulate in their mind. And so, when I talk to founders, often they don't necessarily draw this picture, but this is pretty much what they're imagining. They've got a really good idea. They're going to build an amazing solution. They're going to start sharing that solution with people who are all going to love it. They're going to all start buying it. And before they know it, they're going to have runaway success. They're going to have trouble selling enough, going to have trouble supplying all of the things that they sell, fulfilling all their sales, and finding team members. That's going to be their challenge. And so this is such a misconception, I guess, of what is really going to happen. And so what is a much more likely path is this whole, people basically, you start with a great idea, but then you start talking to people about it and they give you some feedback. Hopefully you haven't built the whole thing and released version 1.7 before you actually start to get feedback. But then you're talking to people and they give you some ideas and you maybe go around and iterate, or you may take a few backward steps and then you actually put something into market and you start to get some proper feedback and you maybe try to sell something at a first price and people don't buy it, or maybe only 1 or 2 do, and so you revise the price. Maybe you do a big chunk of your product development in here, or you decide to pivot. You've got quite a few things going quite well, but there's one big chunk that's just not making a difference, so you pivot and you go all the way back here and around and up and down, and then you eventually, hopefully, you do still make a success of it, but in no way is it either a straight line or even a neat arc. A lot of what we talk about in Moonshot is launch trajectories and orbits around stars, and so it's this really messy one step forward, two steps back sort of progress. And so having some to help you follow this journey is just invaluable. And that's sort of some of what I'd like to share with you. You came off mute there briefly. Is there anything you want to share?
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't.
Oh, no, Vikram came on. That's right.
That might have been a mistake, sorry.
No stress. No, don't worry about that. And so, again, like I said, because people think about startup as, I've heard people who've been in a, and in fact, interestingly for me, I didn't realize it at the time, but I myself was a part of a business that was really still a startup. It had been going for more than 10 years and was very successful by many measures, and it had top line revenue of nearly 700 million Australian dollars, but it hadn't validated a repeatable and scalable business model, and it definitely wasn't sustainably profitable. Even the repeatability, the business model should have continued to evolve. It had sort of stagnated, and they were operating on very fine margins. And so this idea that you should move beyond the startup phase in your organization is one that is seems a bit strange, I guess, to people who are in startup land. But for me, it's a framework that says startup is exploratory, it is discovery, and you should get to the point where you absolutely have a predictable product or service offering that is priced in a way that allows you to sustainably operate profitably, and then you should also be starting to get to the point where you've got some system and some process so that you can start to scale. Because if you're ever going to actually capture all of that total addressable market that you put in your slide deck, you need to be able to scale. And so this idea of startup being a phase where there's lots of exploration and discovery, that's one of the things that for me is a really powerful model of the things that should be happening in the startup phase. It's not necessarily about building a lot of product in terms of high fidelity. It's absolutely about engaging with potential customers and really trying to be confident that your solution as it currently is formed is a really good and effective and an efficient solution to the problem that people are facing. That you're even really precisely, I guess, addressing a problem that is worth solving. These are some of the things that are uncertain when you start. You've got an idea that you believe that you've seen a problem that you can solve, and you believe that your solution does actually solve that problem, but it might not be an effective solution for everyone experiencing the problem. It might be too hard for some people to use. It might be too expensive for some people to use. There's lots of things that are uncertain, and so this really is a strong model for me about what startup phase should actually be doing. So this then is the stages of, at a high level, sort of the stages of startup. And so we were just talking about how in the early days, it's very much around trying to go out and talk to customers. There's a phrase that is, do things that don't scale. So in this very early stage, spend as much time as you can talking to your earliest customers or your earliest prospects. Maybe you get on the phone and you spend half an hour and getting to understand their actual work situation and collecting data yourself to just see whether or not other people who are experiencing the problem experience it in the same way that you did. That is, hoping that you have actually experienced the problem personally yourself. Again, one of the things that I really find differentiates founders who end up being successful often from those who don't, it's about how personally you're connected to the problem that you're solving. When you've had personal experience of a problem, you understand how it impacts at least you and the people that you care about. Other people with the same problem may experience it quite differently, but really understanding how a problem impacts people in their work life or their personal life is just invaluable in trying to pull together, design and build an effective solution. One of the things, again, I'm not sure how much people have covered design thinking as an example, another sort of frame of really good thinking. But the early stages of design thinking are about empathy. They're about immersion. Spending time in the situation of the people who are experiencing the problem that you're hoping to solve. And so really immersing yourself in their workday by going and observing some of your customers in their work setting. These are the things that you can't do by the time that you're trying to get 100 new customers a week. You can't do that. But in the early days, you can certainly spend that amount of time with individuals. So do things that don't scale. Collect data on across a range that is quite different to when you're in the later stages. And so it's all about discovery, making sure that you have a problem worth solving. Does it actually create so much discomfort or waste or cost for the people who are affected by the problem that they will pay you money to get it solved? That's some of the things that you need to try and validate early on. The uncertainty at the start is indeed whether or not it is a problem worth solving, whether or not there are going to be enough people with this problem to actually build a viable business. All of that is uncertain at the start. And so as a founder, you need, on the one hand, to be convinced that it's going to be worthwhile you putting the effort in to try and get this business going. But using some of the structure that we're working through actually helps you to move as quickly as you can to try and collect data, collect insights, reduce the uncertainty, and reach some of these sort of milestones or go, no-go points. And so you can see on the chart where we've got this line here, which could be revenue growth, could be active users, could be lots of different measures. Definitely not downloads or subscribers. Neither of those are effective measures of success for your business. Neither of them really indicate either propensity to pay or indeed track payments made. But this idea that this is the potential growth of your business, and then there are these milestones where this concept of product market fit, the one before that, which is around problem solution fit. There's data you can collect that helps you to overcome the uncertainty and move forward with confidence. And if you can't get to the point where you've got multiple people who are experiencing a problem giving you feedback that your solution is both effective and desirable, that's where you start to get data, where you start to get quantitative feedback that maybe your idea is not the next big thing. And so as scientific people, which I know a lot of you are, it's the discipline of collecting data and being objective in your interpretation of that data. It's a way to try and help you move beyond just being really positive and enthusiastic about how amazing your solution is going to be, and actually collecting some real data to reduce the uncertainty. So that's the intent. And so again, this is out of Risa's lean startup, the idea of the build, test, build, measure, and learn. And so what's the idea that you have for solving a problem, for defining a problem and solving and then defining a solution? What's your idea for it? And then building a really simple version of your solution. Again, your minimum viable product is a label that people bandy around without really thinking how simple it could be. Again, especially technical people. When I say to technical people, your MVP could be as simple as a sketch on a piece of paper. They just go, that's no solution. That's not a version of a product at all. And it's like, absolutely it is. If you can take a piece of paper with a diagram or a concept even, and you can have a conversation with a potential customer and validate how significant the problem is and get their feedback initially on whether or not your idea for a solution, if they think it's even practical, that's feedback. That's a minimum version of your product. It's not necessarily the viable product from a hardware perspective that often people think about MVP meaning, but it's absolutely a way for you to test whether or not there's interest in, whether or not people think that really could be practical. Would they buy this thing from you if it did exist? Those are the sort of answers. That's the sort of data that you can start to collect just with some sketches on a piece of paper. It can be that simple. The classic sketch on the back of a napkin, like literally, that can carry conversations with potential customers and allow you to start going around this this cycle. And it's not, you don't stop there, but it's absolutely a place that you can start, because the longer you wait to engage with real prospective customers, the longer you wait to be getting real feedback on your idea, both validating how significant the problem is, but also trying to collect some data on whether or not your idea for a solution sounds desirable, sounds practical to the people you hope to sell it to. That's the sort of thing that the sooner you can start, the sooner you can start to feed real data into this circle. You can start to actually collect data back from those survey prospects, and you can feed that into iterations of your design and your build. And so, again, what the lean startup is all about is implementing a bit of system and method to in a disciplined and structured way, reduce the uncertainty. So every new idea starts with lots of uncertainty. So you don't feel like your particular situation that you're facing any more uncertainty than anybody else. Everybody faces a huge amount. But by having a bit of a structured approach to collecting data and iterating, that's what helps you to reduce the amount of uncertainty. And sometimes you can reduce it very quickly. And so the amount of time that you need to be operating in a state of uncertainty, in some ways, you can't necessarily determine ahead of time exactly when you'll move through the problem solution fit milestone. But what it helps you to do is to feel like you're making progress. You are collecting data toward an objective, and you're not certain of when the experiment's going to end or when the objective is going to be hit, but you're confident that you're collecting data and you're iterating and you're making progress. So it does really rely, I guess, to a degree on defining progress and having measurement systems that are different to just activity. And for a lot of people, even in previous work experience, other day jobs, lots of businesses are not very good at actually understanding what outputs are, what outcomes are, and still too many organizations measure people's contribution by activity rather than by outcome. After all of our years of COVID, lots of businesses have been forced to reassess the number of hours that somebody spends in the office. They've been forced to disconnect the amount of time that you are in the office from your contribution. They've had to find other ways to measure it, but still not every business is very good at the setting objectives and assessing progress toward them and rewarding people for making progress toward an objective rather than just rewarding people for the amount of activity that they undertake. So it's a little bit of a different mindset, a little bit of a shift. But again, that from the perspective of trying to face up to the uncertainty and to reduce it, it gives you a bit of a structured approach to being able to collect data and reduce the uncertainty. And so this framework from Blank, if you can imagine each of those circles is, again, the iterative process. So when you're in customer discovery, you're having conversations with people about their experience of the problem. You're collecting data on how big a problem it is for them, how big a a cost impact it makes or a time impact. And each time you go around the circle, you get more and more refined design or version of your solution. And so you then get to the point where, yep, people are saying this definitely solves my problem. And you can move on to then trying to figure out, well, how do you package up your solution? I was talking earlier today to a founding team who are building out off the back of some, like, literally chemistry lab research. And so, for them, the problem solution fit could be achieved basically still almost on the lab bench. They're confirming that their treatment of a particular piece of equipment is effective. And so, yep, problem solution fit could be confirmed. But then how do they actually make that solution available to people with that piece of equipment? If they're talking about a large industrial operation, how do the people operating the equipment, operating the factory, how do they get access to the solution of this founding team? Because at the moment, they're just operating in a chemistry lab on a bench. And so, this next circle is really very much around how do we package up our solution in a way that makes it easy for people to find us, easy to buy our solution, easy to use our solution, and then hopefully when we have an amazing experience, easy for us to share our delight with whatever their solution has been. And so again, each one is a iterative cycle to improve the solution to the point where you're ready to move on. And especially in here between discovery and validation, there could be this large scale iteration as well. Like you might, and often that's what a pivot would look like. You get some really specific validation from customers about how effective the solution is, but they say, but it's too hard to buy, or I just can't fit that solution, those activities into our normal work activities or normal work process. So can you repackage it, or can we have 3/4 of that solution and this other functionality that would fit in with our operation? And so you could have that sort of large scale iteration as well as the smaller scale iteration before you then move on. So again, these are frameworks, ways of thinking, I guess, and methods or approaches to help you to get a bit scientific about it all. So let's just have a quick look at the next one. Yeah, all right. So I will pause in a moment just to make sure, just to check if there are any questions. But this is another one where, I just want to, in terms of the talking through how to think about your job as a startup founder. I often say to people, back to those founders on the first slide who are imagining that their brilliant solution that they'd almost finished engineering was just going to fly off the shelves. A part of getting those people to actually think about how to make sales, like one of the most important skills and one of the skills that is so rarely a part of founding teams is sales. Like sales is all about empathy. It's about understanding the situation of the people that you're trying to help. It's about being able to describe to them, that you understand the problem that they're facing and that the solution that you're bringing will be really easy for them to use, and to be convincing and compelling in being able to have that conversation. If you understand, if you have actually lived in their shoes, if you do truly understand their situation, you can talk really explicitly about how you've maybe faced the problem yourself, or you can talk really explicitly how you understand how much it costs them, how many times a week they have to clean this particular piece of equipment. Back to my team from earlier today, your conversation with a prospect is so much richer and authentic when you truly do understand their situation. And so the reality is that even when you have a good understanding of the situation in which your solution will be deployed, There's still lots of different mindsets. Everybody makes decisions in different ways, and everybody buys in different ways. And so this distribution helps you to think through the fact that even everybody who really does need your solution, even if this population is everybody who really does need your solution, there's still going to be some people who will be willing to engage with you and try it out and maybe even buy it, but right at the beginning, before it's got all of its problems and faults ironed out. And so your job is to really find those first sales, the really early customers, and to work with them really closely to understand how well your solution solves their problem. And at the early stages, those innovators are likely to have a very high tolerance, for things being not quite right. It doesn't need to be perfect. And so, again, back to the MVP, don't feel like you need to have something that's perfectly engineered or perfectly built before you go to market. Start to engage with these people who identify as innovators, and they will actually welcome the chance to contribute to the design. Like in some ways, they actually would prefer for you to come and share with them something that's not quite right, because based on your feedback, like you might incorporate some of their feedback into your eventual design, and that would be super motivating for them. Whereas these people down the back here, like even the early majority, let alone the late majority or the laggers, like even the late majority, they don't want to have any input into the design at all. They basically want to know that half the population has used the thing already and it caused no problems for them, and they'll give it a go. Basically, the laggards, they won't use it until somebody tells them to, until the regulation changes and they have to do this thing. So when you think about the uncertainty, there are ways to reduce the uncertainty when you approach it with a scientific mindset. When you think about having conversations with these innovators and early adopters, when you think about continuing to iterate your design based on their feedback, all of that is dealing with uncertainty, collecting data, and reducing the uncertainty. There's always uncertainty. And so it's not about trying to get a perfect plan. It's not about trying to overcome all the uncertainty before you start. It's about accepting that there is significant and persistent uncertainty, and that your job as a founder is essentially to take your product and your service, and over time your team, and to basically navigate all of that uncertainty in a way that reduces it, but you can never remove it. Like there's always going to be elements of uncertainty around everything that you do. And so there's a phrase called feel the fear, but do it anyway. It's that, don't pretend that you're going to get to a point where you've collected so much data that you can proceed without fear or uncertainty. That's just like, if that's what you're aiming for, then you shouldn't be an entrepreneur even, let alone a startup founder. It's like there's always so much uncertainty about things that you need to be able to tolerate the uncertainty. But this scientific method to reduce the uncertainty is one of the best ways for new businesses to actually release products and services. And one of the things that I do some investing. As an investor, you want to be reassured that your founding team do have a bit of a scientific method, that they're not just trying lots of different things and not keeping track of what works and what doesn't. Everybody faces uncertainty. Some people actually try and make their way through it in a scientific way, collecting data, generating insights, and iterating their design and their plans. So that's a part of what I wanted to take you through. Just let me check. I'm just checking what else I've got in the deck. And so again, let me pause here, because the business model is really a pretty significant thing. All the way back to that phrase from Steve Blank back at the one of the early slides, which is that startup is a temporary organisation that the purpose of which is to, search for and find a repeatable and scalable business model. And so even business model is one of those things where people go, what even is a business model? And so, again, as an engineer, I've seen models for lots of different things. And, one of my favorite phrases is that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. Often people get so attached to a model that, they almost believe that the model will predict, real life perfectly. And it never does. It never does. A great model will help you to generate a good estimate, but all models are wrong. No model can be so complex and sophisticated that it can truly, predict real life with all of the uncertainty around real life. And so this is a model really, I find it really valuable because it's so simple and yet so flexible. So just again, give me a bit of a sense. I'm still not sure of the best way to do this, but maybe just hit one of your responses. Give me a sense of who has actually done more than one business model canvas. More than one. I don't care how many, but more than one, not just one.
So we don't have responses in Discord, but we do have a chat. If you go to the top right corner,
oh, there we go.
can open the chat and sort of.
Oh, I see. There we go. Yeah, cool. Well, maybe pop in there. How many you've done.
And we'll just need Malcolm to mute. Thank you. Welcome to also let us know in using your voice if you'd like to.
Yes, that also works, of course. This is one of those tools that is talked about so often. I'm just really interested in how many of you have actually filled it out more than once. Like I say, it's sort of the first couple of times that you fill it out is really still learning, what each of the boxes really means and things. So, for people to have done a few of these is when you really start to get a sense of how you might use it for your business.
Grant, it's Divya here. I just had a question about this because I've seen this before, but I haven't actually filled it out. And I just wondered what's the best time to kind of fill it out. Do you need quite a concrete idea or,
Not at all. That's an excellent question, Divya. Thank you for asking it. And again, I say to teams that ideally, you're back to iterative. I've been talking the last few slides, the last 5 minutes or so about this iteration. So you give something a go, you test it out, you measure what happens when you test it out, and then you learn. You generate insights from what you've measured, and you go around the circle again. It's the same with a business model canvas. So you do not need to have a lot of information to start. What this helps you to do is, customer segment. Try and be quite clear about who it is that you're hoping to help and what their problem is. So one of the things that this canvas doesn't do as well as I would like is to really force you to define the problem that you're helping a customer to solve. Now, segments, you might have slightly different groups of people that you believe are affected by the same problem, or you might have people that are affected by similar problems. Like segmentation can happen a few different ways. But first off, be really clear about who it is that you hope to help and what problem you hope to help them with. And so again, you don't need a lot of information here, but if you're thinking about starting a business, you at least have some idea of who you'd like to work with and how you'd like to help them. And then if you then look at your value proposition, what is it that you're going to help these people, if I could drive, what is it that you're going to help them, to solve? So how is your product or service going to help them fix their problem that they're facing over here? Again, very early on, there should be, you should have a bit of an idea of what your solution might look like. So Strategizer down here, strategizer.com. At strategizer.com, they also have a canvas called Value Proposition Canvas. And the Value Proposition Canvas fits on here. It's a circle and a square. The circle fits on customer and the square fits on value proposition. And so one of the things that it does is it helps you to really drill into what are the jobs that a customer is trying to do, what are the things that make the achievement of that job harder, what does a great job look like. It really encourages you to really zero in and become, that empathy or that immersion I was talking about earlier, to become really familiar with the situation that your customers are in when they face this problem, so that you can get really clear-eyed, really sharp about what that problem looks like and what impact it has. Again, you don't need to have a lot of information to your question about, how much data do you need to put into this. The first time that you do a canvas, really you can just have a few dot points in each of the boxes, but start by really having a clear idea of who you're trying to help, what problem you're trying to help them solve, and then also talking a bit about what might your solution look like. From there, you can say, all right, well, is it going to be, like transactional? Is it almost like retail? Or are they just going to come into, are they going to come to my storefront and just buy this one thing and I'll never see them again? And if they do, buy it online, like Amazon, do they basically, just buy this thing from me and then, they get a digital download? And so, that's where you start to see how these 4 panels can work together. What's the problem you're solving? What's your solution look like? And what sort of a relationship will you have with the customer, and how are you going to deliver the solution? And so again, you don't need a lot of data, but the first time that you do it, just put a few dot points in these squares. The left-hand side, for me, is more about when you start to think about scaling. But even right at the start, you should think about, is there anything in terms of key activities? Does your solution require, trade secrets maybe? What are the things that you need to do to actually create your value prop, your product or your service? And then, the key resources, that's things like staff as well as physical resources, and whether or not you indeed need to partner with people in order to be able to provide your value proposition. So that's sort of the top part of the model, is really who are you going to help, what problem are you going to help them solve, how are you going to help them solve it in terms of product or service, how are you going to engage with them, commercially to get paid for your solution and deliver your solution, and do you need to work with other people, or think about what staff and systems, infrastructure, and other capabilities you might need. Now down the bottom, in terms of cost and revenue, when you've thought about all the things that go into your product or service, the first thing that you can pull together is a bit of an outline of cost structure. And so again, you can do this with minimal amounts of information. This can be just really simple, but put down all the things that you can think of that are going to cost you money, including, paying yourself. Again, that's one of the things that founders too often, forget to put in their cost structure, or choose not to put in their cost structure. If you're going to build a business, it has at some point to pay you. So you put all your costs in there. You can choose at any time, which costs you want to try and recoup in terms of your revenue streams, but put all of your costs down, because if you ignore costs, what too often happens is that you build a business that can never cover those costs because you haven't thought about them comprehensively enough from the start. And then in terms of revenue streams, how are you even going to make your product or service available? And so what sort of package how will you package it up? Again, if it's a service, are you going to actually go to the customers? Are you going to go to the customer and deliver it? Does the customer come to you? Is it online? Thinking about how you're going to package up that service, and pricing in order to generate revenue is one of the things that people, too often just default to cost plus. How much are all of the bits going to cost me? I'll add 10% and that'll be my price. And what that avoids is a really good understanding of your value proposition. If you're able to save someone who spends $200,000 a year maintaining a piece of equipment, and your solution allows them to halve that expense, then I would suggest that, in terms of depending on how good a salesperson you are, if you're going to save someone $100,000 a year, then you would be hard pressed to not be able to sell your solution for $10,000. Like, I'm going to charge you a tenth of what you're going to save in order to make a change to your process. Is a pretty easy sell. I know that there are salespeople I know who would be able to sell something that cost 80% of the saving, and they would still make a sale. But that's a much harder sales proposition, and I certainly couldn't make it. But even I, as a terrible salesperson, can sell something that's only a tenth of the cost of the saving. And so that's a really different view on how much to charge. It's got nothing to do with how much it might cost, but it's got all to do with how much value I'm actually going to provide to a customer when they receive my solution. And so you can do all of that, Divya, right at the start when you're just imagining that you would offer a solution into the marketplace. But over time, every time you go around that iterative circle, you collect more information, you learn more about how much it really does cost someone who's affected by the problem, so you can refine your quantitative assessment of the value that you might be able to add by solving the problem. All the time, you're collecting data and getting new insights that will help you to update your business model. And so it's definitely not something that you just do once right at the start with a little bit of information and you never revisit it. It's absolutely a living concept that needs to evolve as you go to market and you start to collect data about how well your solution is matched to the problem as it truly manifests in market. And then as you get to the point where you're starting to think about the product market fit, where your solution is easy to find and buy, again, you update this canvas. One of the businesses that I worked with, and a business that I wasn't able to influence as much as I would have liked to, they started when they were in mobile recharge. So anybody who uses prepaid or has friends or family who use prepaid mobile, you basically need to buy time before you use it. And so they started providing mobile recharge time last century, as it turns out, back when you had to get a card and you would scratch the card and the card would have a PIN number under it. So you would buy the card, you would scratch to find what the PIN number was, and you would then put the PIN into your phone at the right time. And so when there were physical scratch cards, basically when they were purchased, it was like a check. It was almost like money. They were giving you money. And so they had to buy them straight away before they could sell them. For anybody who's got any experience in retail, there's a concept called consignment where you get stock, but you don't have to pay for it until you sell it. Even newspapers is one of the things that interests me, that is usually on consignment. And so these people were not operating on consignment because the cards that they were buying had a real value and could basically be stolen. It was like a check. It could be stolen, it could be written out by someone completely different. But by the time I joined them, all of that process had been digitized. And so all that you were buying was an encrypted PIN. And so it didn't need to be paid for at the time that it was issued by the carrier, by the telco, because the telco could have cancelled all of those PINs. They could have cancelled them with a simple series of keystrokes. They could have cancelled them at any time before they got sold, and it would have been no skin off their nose. There was nothing physical, nothing truly at risk. but they were still paying for them when they bought them. And so the business that I was working with was growing more than 30% year on year. They had, I think I mentioned earlier, top line revenue when I joined of more than $500 million, so $500 million a year. And so every week they had to buy, it was a fortnightly, every fortnight they had to buy $20 million worth of these recharge. And it just turned into the biggest financial burden. They should have changed their business model, and they didn't. 10 years down the track, they still had the same business model that they started with, and it pushed them out of business. I left, and 18 months after I left, they went into administration with debts of $250 million. Like, business model, your business, the market that you're in, your competitors, like your situation is always changing, and so you should always have a mind to strategy and business model. That was a very, very long answer, Divya, but as you can tell, it's something I'm passionate about. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you. That was very useful. Thank you.
Cool. Let's just finish then on this idea of uncertainty. I mean, that really was the frame for the session. And for me, people sometimes aren't clear themselves on the difference between uncertainty and ambiguity, but uncertainty is where you don't even have enough information. And so uncertainty comes from not having enough information to be able to answer a question. Whereas ambiguity often comes from there being multiple options, multiple solutions, an ethical choice or an unethical choice. Like, the ambiguity, the reason you can't make a choice in ambiguity is not always, but often it's not because you haven't got enough information. Like, you've got plenty of data on both options, but you're having trouble deciding which option is better. And so uncertainty and ambiguity are quite different things. Uncertainty can scientifically be reduced, as we've talked about. Approach it with a bit of a scientific mindset, have your hypotheses, run your experiments, collect your data, refine your insights, and then go back to the starter and go through your loop. Ambiguity is rarely resolved in that way. Ambiguity is more along the lines of, you have to make a choice and then almost see how it goes, but you don't necessarily collect data to refine your approach. Sometimes you just sort of either you try something and you get fined, or whatever goes wrong happens in a different way. You're learning from navigating ambiguity happens differently to the opportunity to learn from a scientific approach to reducing uncertainty. With validation, so again, the iterative method ideally is about structuring hypotheses, learning and iterating. But at the point where you collect enough information to actually invalidate your hypothesis, well, then you're faced with a challenge where you say, all right, well, I was working toward this outcome based on this hypothesis, and that hypothesis has been invalidated. And at that point, again, pivot is one of those phrases that gets thrown around a lot. Pivot is, for those who do understand, pivot from a basketball or a sporting sense, like you keep one foot in place and you only move one of your feet. The idea of a pivot is that you keep a bunch of your solution, but you adopt or adjust another chunk of your solution. And that could be, it could be 80%, could be 20%, could be 5%, whatever. But it's the idea that you through your experimentation, you confirm that a bunch of your stuff is great, but a little bit it needs to change. And so, those are a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. We are now right on time, and I'm happy to stay on for another 5 minutes or so if anyone's got any questions. But that was really, just trying to help you understand that there is a bit of method and an approach that can be taken to launching in uncertainty. So I hope that was useful.